It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Subash Technosis. You go to subashtechnosis.com if you need a website designed. If you already have a website and you need search engine optimization to get yourself ranked high in Google there, in Google searches, any kind of content writing, press releases, data entry, all kinds of services. They can even handle your customer service for you. If you have a website and you want to have that chat with a customer service rep, they can handle that for you as well. SubashTechnosis.com, or you can go to their Facebook page, Subash Technosis LLC, and give them a little like there. Mention. By the way, if you're going to hook up with Subash, tell them that you heard about him on the Opperman Report. You get a good deal. Also, too, guys, don't forget, you want to copy my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator? You can either get that at Amazon.com or at my website. You can get an autographed copy if you go to emailrevealer.com. And I just put in another order for books, so those should be coming in shortly and out in the mail even quicker. Okay, we have a returning guest today. His name is Mike Parziale. Parziale?
That's right.
Parziale. And Mike's a good guy. He's been on the show once before. We were talking about the story of Wade Robeson and the Michael Jackson, one of Michael Jackson's victims. And it's kind of a funny story because for some reason I thought his name was Christian the last time I had him on, and now I keep forgetting his name because in all my notes it says Christian instead of Mike. So Mike, real quick, tell everybody about yourself and remind everybody about who is Mike Parziale.
Sure. Honestly, I'm just a regular working guy. Part of my passion of researching the Michael Jackson case, as well as researching sort of other high-profile cases involving child sexual abuse, really comes from my own experience as being an abuse victim. And it took me years and years and years to sort of come to sort of face that, and it sort of happened right when I began to start, putting up this page for the victims of Michael Jackson and Wade Robson. Sort of all collided almost at once, and then at that point, when I started researching, I really just began to really delve into this because this topic itself is so compelling. And it bothers me because it's so poorly reported that I felt that I had to do what I can and what any one person can to try to educate people and spread information out in a forum which is educational and also which people can act. And and that's really my story. It's when it relates to this sort of topic.
Yeah, and the last time you were on the show, you only used your first name, Mike, because of all the stalking, right? That you get when you start sticking your neck out on this kind of topic. It brings out a bunch of nuts, right? It still does. As soon as I did that report, somebody had put a page up with my picture and name, and it was a Facebook page they put up, and trying to get people to sort of harass me or whatever they were trying to do, and I had to do whatever I could to get it taken down. But it's very difficult to understand unless you really are working in it. And I tell my friends, and then we talk about this, but they're like, they don't even get it. It's just very surreal. Yeah, it seems to attract some pretty strange characters, who want to support Michael Jackson, or we're going to be getting into other cases, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, and what is it, Marty Singer, right? Brian Singer?
Brian Singer, yeah.
Yeah, Brian Singer, yeah. A lot of these different cases. And it's always interesting, too, that when they report on these cases in mainstream media, they always seem to make like a joke about it, like especially Michael Jackson. It's always like, oh, that wacky Jackson, making jokes about Boy Scouts in his pants, like just really bizarre stuff. Like you wouldn't think if someone was a victim of just a physical assault, or a victim of a car crash even, that they would never dream of making these kind of jokes about it. But they just treat the Michael Jackson and his victims as some kind of just bizarre little plaything, kind of a joke. Have you noticed that?
Well, of course, and it's because they turn them into caricatures.
Right.
They turn them into sort of almost non-entities. They're not really, Wade, James, Jason, Jordan, and Gavin. They're just sort of apparitions that sort of float in the ether. And people cannot connect to that. And they've also done a very, very good job of making it seem like all these cases were just about money. And this is just, all they are just extortionist cases, just all about extortion, and these people are nothing but sort of money-hungry type people. And that is their sort of definition. And so when you hear people come on and talk about Michael Jackson, and you hear about these accusers, you will always hear the motive of money being brought up, or the motive of Michael Jackson would never do something like this. I know him so well. These people were just after money. He was such a vulnerable target. You will hear it over and over again because of the fact that people do not look, and that's what I'm trying to do on this page. I'm trying to humanize these people, and put their faces there and their names and say these are human beings. These are not just sort of, caricatures that you might, just sort of pick somebody and throw it in that spot. They all have different stories. They all have different situations, and they all get lumped together as just, liars.
Yeah, it's interesting too. That like even with my show, we touch on this topic quite a bit. With the Franklin cover-up and these kind of things. And one time it really sticks out because a really popular network, like a really big one that people would recognize right away if I mentioned it, they had approved my show. They wanted to start carrying my show. And they said, well, where can we, get copies of your shows to play? And I sent them to the Spreaker. And the first couple of shows were about the Franklin cover-up and stuff like that. And as soon as they saw that, they said, oh, we don't want to play this stuff. And
well, if they actually did the research, if they actually read some of the books that are out there, the Franklin Scandal is a phenomenal book. It's incredibly detailed. And it has document after document after document that lays out that whole case. And, I think it's almost a must-read for people who are, studying child exploitation and people who are getting into that field, because it shows you that even people that are there to protect children can become the exact opposite. And they can actually, in some cases, protect the offender. Nick Bryan did a phenomenal job with that book. I don't know if you've ever had him on, but he's phenomenal.
Yeah, I had Nick on the show. We discussed that and something else. Oh, I think the Epstein case as well. But it's not that they don't believe it's true. It's just they don't want to touch the topic. And also too, and also too, before I started doing this radio show and getting into this really extreme topics, and the more edgier stuff, I used to do a lot of reality TV stuff, Dr. Drew, and the kind of more mainstream stuff. And even now, I pitch myself for these reality TV shows. They want a PI, to come on their show, and they'll say, "Well, what cases are you working on?" And I'll start talking about stuff, like Aquino and the satanic cults and this kind of a ritual. Man, they don't want to touch that at all. That's the last time you'll ever hear from these people. They don't want to go near that stuff. So that's been my experience.
Well, it's just thank God for alternative media and the internet.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone would even know half of what's going on.
Yeah, that's the truth. Okay, so now you were telling me right before we went on the air, because I just did a show the other night about Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, and we were looking at the clues. Many people think it points toward Charlie Sheen. And then you had some new information. What have you come up with?
Well, that's one of them, and because there's several abusers.
Right.
And, the one that everyone seems to be pointing at for the sort of the bigwig type abuser is Charlie Sheen. But the other abuser that needs to be talked about is a guy named Dominic Brascia.
Right. And
Dominic Brascia is, he was a very low-level actor. He did, Friday the 13th, and he worked with a movie with Corey Haim. But he, according to, Corey Haim's actually friend who knew him for 20 years, and is actually friends with Corey Haim's mother on Twitter all the time. His name is Greg Harrison. What he has reported, and he's reporting it out of frustration, he's saying, hey, look, when Corey Haim was on his, sort of at the worst of the worst, he really didn't want a lot of this information put out. Corey Feldman has come on and sort of laid this information out there. He goes, but you should realize, he goes, there's other parts of the story, and one of the other parts is this guy named Dominic Brascia. And Dominic Brascia was introduced to Corey Haim by Corey Feldman when he was about 14 years old. And Dominic Brascia is someone that supposedly not only did he sort of sexually abuse him, but he actually had a relationship with Corey Haim. And it got so intimate that some people even thought they were almost dating. But that wasn't the case. He was a child, obviously, and Corey Haim sort of looked up to this guy, and eventually realized that this was totally wrong. But what was funny was that Dominic Brascia is not. If you go on his Twitter account, he's been sort of answering questions and posting things about this topic because people have been contacting him. I contacted him last night, and I asked him point blank. I said, okay, this is what Greg Harrison has said. It's been reported by Perez Hilton. And my question to you is that will you take a lie detector test to prove that you did not do this? And at first he answered yup, and I wasn't sure what he was answering yup to because there was other questions in there. Right. And then I put it to him directly. Will you take a lie detector test? And he said yes. So hopefully he's not just blowing smoke, but a lot of people have pointed their fingers at this Daniel Brascia gentleman, and Greg Harrison goes into the fact that Corey Haim's own mother confronted him once and almost put a pool stick over his head because she knew what was going on. But that's something. And then as for Charlie Sheen, Dominic Brascia is supposedly tied up into that whole Radar Online and National Enquirer story. What the theory is that he's the informant to who really the A-list person is, as long as they sort of keep him out of the story. So, and that's what Greg Harrison is sort of alleging, that Dominic Brascia is trying to, play all sort of, holier than thou, but the reality is he actually might have been abusing Corey Haim and now using this platform to try to keep him out of the picture. But Greg Harrison just outed him, so.
Right. The theory is that he's pointing the finger at Charlie Sheen for the Radar Online and the National Enquirer in order to keep his own name away from the scandal, and to make for them not to also point the finger at him as one of the abusers as well. That's
correct. But the theory is that it's not like he's making it up, that he actually has the information.
Right.
He actually does know that it's either Charlie Sheen or someone in that sort of A-list family, but he's sort of being the informant, so they don't sort of now go back after him. So he's sort of a patsy that's sort of going to give the information and be the informant, and part of the deal is that they're not going to mention him.
Now, Dominic Brascia, does he have any kind of conviction or any kind of arrest related to these kind of allegations?
No. No, there's been rumors, there's been speculation. What was funny is he did an interview for the National Enquirer in 2000, if I'm correct, 2014, where he talks about when Corey Feldman came out with that book, Choreography. He talks about how he knew who the A-list celebrity was, but he never ever tells who the A-list celebrity was. And that was picked up by the National Enquirer. So he's sort of inserted himself in this a couple of times. But from my knowledge, no, I don't think he was ever arrested on any charges of misconduct.
There was also some stuff going on with the choreography Amazon.com page where people were accusing Brascia, and Brascia actually came on and started posting back saying, no, I've been cleared by this, and I had an apology from the publisher?
Yeah, and from what I've read about that, too, is technically it really wasn't an apology as well as much as it was, well, no, that's not what, it's not sort of it's not a definitive, we'll put it that way, that, technically, Corey Haim didn't mention anybody, except for, I think, one or two people. But he didn't mention Dominic by name, but everyone was going on there saying, yeah, we believe it was Dominic Brascia. And more than likely, it was people that knew Corey Haim. This guy, Greg Harrison, seems like somewhat of a stand-up individual. There's no benefit for him to come forward really with this. He didn't go to a tabloid. He did it on his Facebook page.
Right, and he said it was out of frustration. He wrote. I read that first long Facebook post, and he said it was out of frustration that he was finally doing it. He did it late at night too, which usually has a ring of truth to it too. And also too, Corey Haim's mother has issued a statement, pretty much telling Corey Feldman, "Hey, just shut up about all this and cut it out." Previously. And
Corey Haim was on the Dr. Oz show, and he sort of, basically said, well, I'm no longer going to really talk about Corey Haim anymore. It's getting me in too much trouble. But Corey Feldman, when it comes to Corey Haim, from what I've read with that sort of post from Greg Harrison, was that he really wasn't really good friends with Corey Haim. That when they really didn't talk to each other much at all until that show came out, the two Coreys. And then, there was sort of a working relationship. But Corey Haim really never really liked Corey Feldman that much. And he also was very angry with Corey Feldman because Corey Feldman, they had done a movie together. I forget the name of the movie at this point, but they had done a movie, and I want to say it was in 1996. And Corey Haim walks into the set, and who does he see? The first person he sees is Corey Feldman and Daniel Brascia. And supposedly, Corey Haim takes, Corey Feldman by the throat and says, what the hell is he doing here? Why did you bring him over here? And Corey Feldman thought, well, I thought it would be a good idea. And supposedly, in that show, The Two Coreys, this was one of the people that Corey Haim was talking about when he said, well, yeah, I was raped at, when I was 14 years old, and you knew about it, and he was a friend of yours.
Right.
So, a lot of it sort of makes sense. And I just think this guy's one of the sort of people involved in this, but I just think that something just doesn't smell right here.
Now, since the last time you were on the show, you started a new website, mjvictims.com. Now, mostly to cover the Michael Jackson stuff, but do you cover this kind of stuff on there too on mjvictims.com?
Yeah, it's, when I did the page, it was, when I first started it was really to cover the Wade Robson story, supporters of Wade Robson. It then has morphed into, in the last year and a half, 2 years at least, into talking about a whole slew of other cases that that show, what I call elite pedophilia, and that show these, and to try to explain why these high-profile cases need to be covered and why they are so important. For anyone that's listening to this, I urge you. There's a video. It's called. I didn't do this video. It's been out for a while, but it's a video called "Boys for Sale." It was a documentary that was done in 1980-81. It was done by a group of people. It was a reporter and it was a professor, and it was on, if I'm correct, it was on a local channel in Houston. But they talked about things, that you would think about when you think about the Franklin cover-up, and you think about what's going on in Hollywood, and you think about pedophilia, sort of pedophilia rings. They were talking about this in 1980-81, and the information that's in that, it's like a 2-hour documentary, and the way it's presented and the way it's shown it's mind-blowing. It's so way ahead of its time. But when you watch that, it gives you a really, really good base to why some of these things happen. And even back then, how prevalent it was.
Is this the one where there's like 4 men sitting at a chair? They're all wearing like short sleeve shirts, collared shirts.
Yes.
And a couple of those guys are dead now, right? They were killed.
Well, one of the guys, the professor, he supposedly committed suicide.
Right.
And then I don't know about the other 3. The other report, that's the guy you might want to get on. I can't think of his name at the time. He's still around.
Okay.
But he reported this, and what was funny about it, what they were reporting was that in that time in Texas, that they were finding there were more boy prostitutes out on the streets than there were adult female prostitutes. That it was literally an epidemic. And it had gotten so bad at some points that when I think they were having a convention, I don't know if it was a national convention, and what was going on there, they literally had to take these children out of Houston and bus them over to another city because they didn't want all these boys loitering and hanging out, looking for business. That's how bad it got. And some of these boys that were on this documentary were found killed.
Yeah.
After they spoke up and talked about it, they were actually found dead. It's an amazing documentary, but it talks about some of the reasons why some of this behavior happens. And you would think it would be, very much mob-related. You would think it would be like the seediest, dirtiest. But what they were talking about is that it was an adjunct of clean business. So a lot of these boys were being bought and sold, sometimes with credit cards, with lists. You could pick a child and have them sent to you. And a lot of these people were very, very prominent people in the area who were, sort of very high managerial positions and etc. And they believe that it had more to do with power and humiliation than it did actually about the act of the sexual act. It's very, very compelling. It was. I posted it on the page as well, but it's something that someone really, if you want to get a good baseline, it's a good documentary to watch.
Okay, send me the name of the guy who's still available, because it was my understanding that everyone in that video was dead, and I never followed up on it.
Yeah, I will definitely do that.
Now, real quick, are you aware of the new developments in the John Wayne Gacy case?
That I haven't heard of. Oh. No. I mean, I don't know what new developments there could be, but no.
Okay.
What is going on with that?
This is a big deal. What is going on with that is one of the victims that was buried under his home, these young men. I think this guy was a teenager, too. It turns out through DNA now, it's the victim is not the person who they thought it was. So the mother of the victim has hired this attorney who right now is currently in negotiations with the DA's office down there for a whole new blockbuster development going on down there. He's ready to come on the show as soon as this deal is done. But there's a connection to a guy who is a convicted sex offender who had in his possession, who lived right down the block from Gacy. One of Gacy's employees also worked for this guy. There's numerous connections between Gacy and this character. And the guy had in his Rolodex up to 30,000 names of victims and customers in his little black book and in his Rolodex. Yeah, it's a huge operation of boys being trafficked, little kids being trafficked. And the cops arrested him, and they lost, quote unquote, lost the Rolodex and lost these lists of all these names. The evidence all disappeared. Yeah. So the whole John Wayne Gacy case from beginning to end stinks. The guy guy's taking a picture with Rosalind Carter. It just stinks from beginning to end. But this development is just huge, and you don't hear about it anywhere. Yeah, no one's talking about it. But I got the lawyer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Okay, you know what? This might be a good time to take a little break, and then we'll get back with more of Mike Parziale. And his website is mjvictims.com. Am I pronouncing that right, Parziale?
That is correct.
Okay, Parziale. We'll be right back with more of Mike Parziale right after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. On our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we can trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh, boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the Opperman Report .com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations live Friday night and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air, you get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by the range covers 5 million people in population where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Mike Parziale, and he runs mjvictims.com about the Michael Jackson case, but he's also an expert on all Hollywood pedophilia and all these different topics here. So, Mike, I'll tell you, about a year ago, a film came out by Amy Berg, directed this film, called An Open Secret. And I right away, I said, well, let me, I heard about this film. I said, well, let me get Amy Berg on the show. And I contacted her on Facebook, and I was trying to get her to come on. She never responded to a single message. And then I found out that she was involved with the West Memphis 3 supporters, which goes to show that she'll never come near me. But then I said, well, let me find someone else from this film who can come on the show. And I went to the website, and I contacted the website, and I believe it was the producer, because she was the director, so it had to be the producer. And I contacted him, and I says, who can I get to come on the show as a spokesperson? And he goes, well, Amy Berg has abandoned this film. She's not promoting this film whatsoever. I can't get her to appear on anywhere, to talk about this film, to promote this film in any kind of way. And she pretty much, the film died on the vine because of the lack of promotion by Amy Berg. What do you know about this film?
Well, the producer, there's two of them, Matthew Valentinus and Gabe Hoffman.
Okay.
And they were actually both friends in college. And Matthew Valentinus ended up becoming an entertainment lawyer, and then Gabe Hoffman became a hedge fund manager. and he did very, very well for himself. So what happened was they were sitting around one day, and Gabe Hoffman, talked to Matthew Valentine, who obviously was into film. He said, we should do a documentary. He said, I'm willing to sort of front up the money to do it. He goes, but I want to do something different. I want to do something that's going to, really make an impact. So they, hemmed and hawed for a little bit. And then they saw Corey Feldman go on and talk about pedophilia in Hollywood. And that sparked the interest. So they decided, okay, well, this, would be an interesting topic. It's really never been put in a documentary format. And they started hunting around for people to sort of direct it. They saw Amy Berg's film. They knew of her work from Deliver Us from Evil, which was about the Catholic Church and the scheme that she did she did a great job on that movie. So they figured, what a perfect person to sort of direct this particular film. And so that's what they did. They, there were certain problems that film faced. One of the problems was that before the film was released, there was a gentleman by the name of Michael Egan that hired an attorney who was, and I personally believe that Michael Egan was taken advantage by his attorney. But this attorney was a very, sort of boisterous, loud type of individual that really wanted to make, he had always made a name for himself suing, the Catholic Church and whatnot. But he wanted to, he even said, he goes, I wanted a case like a Hollywood case to really, to put out there. So what happened was, and this is, in my personal opinion, was he found Michael Egan. Michael Egan had a convincing case, but the problem was it really was a dog of a case. He was way past the statute of limitations. They were going to have to take this in court in Hawaii, where the statute of limitations for a very short period of time was going to be lifted, and Michael Egan also had some credibility issues, not relating to the child molestation, but just other issues that he was dealing with, arrests and things like that. But what I believe what Jeff Herman did was Jeff Herman put him up in front of a microphone, and was smart enough to realize, hey, there's something to this. We're going to put Michael Egan up. We're going to make a press conference, and we're going to announce that he's accusing the well-known director Bryan Singer, and then we're going to get other people to come forward that maybe have stronger cases, flush them out, and just sort of use Michael Egan as sort of the catalyst for that happening. The problem with that was that he then took it a step further, and then he started accusing other people that there really wasn't enough evidence to really go after, and some of those people were, a guy by the last name Newman. He was a director, Garth Ancier, and a couple more. But he overreached, and because he overreached, and because he really didn't understand that Michael Egan had a whole bunch of paper trails that sort of pointed in the other direction, that he wasn't, there when he wasn't in Hawaii at that point or whatever. It really put the brakes on that film, because it happened right before the film was going to get distribution, and then people started to think, well, wait a second, if I don't want to be tied to this. And I think that's what Amy Berg, she might not admit this, but I think that's what Amy Berg saw, was that it was too, at that point, high profile and too risky for her to really go into any promotion on. But the problem, what I see with that is that the film, because I've seen the film, there's lots of other, besides Michael Egan, and I think Michael Egan's story is actually very credible, but besides Mike Egan, there's a whole bunch of other people that were named in that film that are convicted, and one name that comes to mind, and it also goes back to Corey Feldman, is a gentleman by the name of Martin Weiss. Martin Weiss was convicted and he was convicted of sexually abusing a young man by the name of Evan Hensley. Evan Hensley was a singer, and what happened was he wanted to get into show business. His parents thought he had some talent. His cousin, his last name is Weiss too, believe it or not, I can't remember his first name, but his cousin got him into it and was represented by Martin Weiss. But what happened with that is that I think it was like the first day they met, they went off to to meet and sort of talk, and they were at went to a park and were shooting hoops. Martin Weiss already started making advances to Evan Hensley. They were sort of, he was talking to them in sort of inappropriate ways and making vulgar jokes, and then eventually he got Evan Hensley into the car, and then asked him some rude questions about have you ever seen a grown man's penis, and then he took him to a secluded area, and then he ended up raping him. And eventually, Evan Hensley had he worked with him for several years, and Martin Weiss became friends with the family. But eventually, he had the courage to come forward and literally tape record Martin Weiss and get him convicted. And what's on that tape recorder is chilling. He's literally asking Martin Weiss, he's talking about, and this is probably 3-4 years after the initial abuse, because it's actually ongoing, but this is about 3-4 years before the beginning of the abuse. He asked him, he said, Martin, he goes, do you remember the time that we went to the park, and remember the time that we actually, played basketball, and then you got me in the car and you asked me about sex and seeing a grown man's penis, and he goes, I guess. And before he could go any further, Martin Weiss asked him this, are you recording this? And Evan was smart enough to say no. And he goes, well, yeah, I guess. He goes, and remember when you, I think you're the first person that ever gave me a blowjob, is what he said. And Martin Weiss literally responded, and this is the chilling part, was, well, Evan, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think that you wanted it. I wouldn't have gone that far if I didn't think that you were interested. And then Evan says, well, at 12 years old, no, I wasn't interested. And then he starts comparing this to, well, in the animal kingdom, animals will have sex with, anything. They'll have sex with male, animals will have sex with other male animals, and they'll have sex with younger animals, and it doesn't make a difference. But as human beings, we socialize this, for us to think it's wrong. So this is what's going on in this guy's head. But Martin Weiss is connected. So what's very funny is Martin Weiss is connected to Corey Feldman, because Corey Feldman mentions that at one point Corey Haim was talking about, believe it or not, making advances to Corey Feldman and talking about how it's okay for two young men to have sex. And Corey Feldman said, no, that's not right. I don't know what you're talking about. But he knew Martin Weiss was there. He knew that Martin Weiss would be interested, and he introduced him to Martin Weiss, and they ended up going off into another room having sex. So what's disturbing is that about the story is this guy has gotten away with it. He got a slap on the wrist. He did about 6 months in jail, and I have a video that's posted on my Facebook page, and it's Corey Feldman. Probably, I want to say this was either in the early 2000s, maybe, on a award show for child actors. And he's talking about it, and almost at the very end, he goes, and I also want to thank Marty Weiss for bringing this all together, for getting this award show put together. I want to thank you. And he knows that Martin Weiss has actually abused his friend Corey Haim, and he's a pedophile. So, this is the mentality in Hollywood.
Wait, you're saying that
go on, and it just happens.
You're saying that Corey Feldman introduced Corey Haim to this guy Martin Weiss, and they went into another room and had sex.
That's correct. According to Corey Haim, yes. He went into Corey Haim was making advances to Corey Feldman, and he said, they mentioned that, why don't we have sex sort of thing, and Corey Feldman said no. And he goes, no, guys don't do that. And he, so he wanted to get out of it. And according to Corey Feldman, he said, well, I know a guy, and he introduced him to Marty Weiss, and they literally went to another room and had sex. and Corey Feldman knew this.
Let me ask you a question.
Corey Feldman knew that he was an abuser.
The film, the reality TV show, The Two Coreys. It was based on this theory that Corey Haim had no place to live, so he went to live on their couch or something like that. And that Corey Feldman was this rich, successful. The whole plot was so ridiculous. Corey Feldman was successful, and Corey Haim was down on his luck, so he had to come stay on his couch or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And Corey Feldman came up with that theory, with his ego. He's a weird guy. But now, was Haim actually living in that house? The house was provided by the production company, right?
It had to have been.
Yeah.
It had to have been. I don't think. And according to, I think Corey Haim's mom is Judy Haim, if I'm correct.
Right.
But according to Corey Haim's mom, they really didn't have a relationship at all. It only was until the Two Coreys hit that they began to sort of, because the show was there, they began to establish a working relationship again, and began to become friendly again. But according again to Corey Haim's mom, that he was very angry with Corey Feldman because of the fact he introduced him to people like Marty Weiss and this other gentleman, Brashia. I mean,
right. Was Haim living in that house?
What was that?
Was Haim living in that house for real, or that was just all staged?
I doubt. I mean, again, it's hard to tell. I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
I mean, it would add to it if they could get him to live together with Corey Feldman, because he was married at the time, or going to be married at the time, I think, when that show was airing, and they were trying to, show that there was conflict between Corey Haim and Corey Haim's soon-to-be wife. And I know on the show at one point they even showed the marriage, but I think a lot of these reality shows are sort of scripted.
Yeah.
And I think, there was probably some real parts of that show, but I think a majority it was just sort of, what sort of salacious things can we throw in there to get ratings. But the other people in that movie, The Open Secret, that get talked about, and I'm going to get to Brian Singer a little bit later, but there's a guy by the name of Bob Villard, and Bob Villard was a child manager, and he was a manager of child actors, and there's a sort of nonprofit that works with parents and who have children in the industry called Biz Parents. They supposedly had Bob Villard on their radar because what they were finding was that headshots of their child actors and headshots of other child actors, some of them with their shirts off and just in really weird, strange poses, were being sold on eBay. So they ended up tracking it down to who was selling these images, and it was Bob Villard. Bob Villard was actually selling these pictures of young boys on the internet. So anyways, he got investigated, and they found child porn on his computer, and they arrested him for that. But then later in 2005, he actually got arrested for a lewd act with a 13-year-old. So there's another person that was in that particular, movie that got out. And one of the worst ones was a guy by the name of Michael Hara. Michael Hara was he was one of the representatives for SAG-AFTRA. And that's an organization that was supposed to monitor to make sure that children in the industry were safe. And they were doing an interview with Michael Hara in the movie, and he was talking about how he was the first person ever to really manage children in Hollywood. Before that, no one ever did it, and that people kind of thought it was strange that he was managing all these children. And you found out that he would have children sort of live with him that were from out of state so he can get them work, and they were all 13 to 16, 17-year-old boys living in this one house. So they kept on questioning him, but I think they already knew something that he wasn't disclosing, and that was, it was an actor, and it's by the name of Joey S., I believe, that worked with him in the past, and he just called him up out of the blue and started talking to him, and he mentioned the name Bob Villard, and he said, yeah, he goes, I'm just curious, what happened to Bob Villard? And then Michael Harris says, well, yeah, I hate to tell you, but he got arrested. And he goes, it's hard to believe some of these things that are said. A lot of times they get blown up in the media and blah, blah, blah. And then he paused and he goes, Michael, I just want to remind you, I just remember something, that when I stayed over your house, one night in bed, you started making, doing some, things that you shouldn't have done to me, some inappropriate things you shouldn't have done to me. And surprisingly, Michael Hara admitted to it and apologized for it. He said, yeah, you're right. When I look back, I probably shouldn't have done that. And, I should have really thought about that. But this is the guy that was one of the heads of SAG and doing this. So it shows you how deep this goes and how, the thread runs through. And, and then they talk about, obviously, Bryan Singer, and they talk about this company called Den, which is Digital Entertainment Network. And that story is totally mind-boggling. It's just what happened in general.
Okay, let's get into all that. You know what? By the way, can you spend like another hour?
Oh, of course.
Okay, great. Okay, because there's just so much I want to cover, and I got notes here that I want to ask you about. That as you're talking,
sure.
Couple of things. Let's just back up here a little bit, because then we'll get because that DEN thing was a whole operation just for pedophiles, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, it was Digital Entertainment Network. It was a brilliant idea. It was just way too ahead of its time.
Okay.
They were going to be Netflix before Netflix even happened.
All right, let's get to that. But first, a couple questions. One is Majestic Magnificent. You know the name, right? Now,
yes.
Corey Feldman
Sadly.
has dedicated this album to Majestic.
I honestly don't know why he would. I mean, he was a hanger-on type guy that, like I said, there was that English gentleman that did that documentary that, he was literally going after Majestic and trying to get him to set up an interview with Joe Jackson. And they ended up settling on, I think, $6,000, and they went in a hotel room and they set this interview up. And when I saw this guy on film, I was like, oh, this guy has to be. There's no way he knows the Jacksons. I'm like, this guy, he looks like, someone that just came off the street. There's no way he knows the Jacksons. And I was wrong, he did.
Yeah, no, he was very close to the Jacksons, to the whole family. Here in Vegas, too. This is kind of a well-known character around here, Supposedly, he was Michael Jackson's magician. Magic with a K, okay, and his name is spelled with a K, Majestic Magnificent with K's in it, and he did magic with a K, and also too that he had something to do with Muhammad Ali too. I believe there's a couple of photos with him with Ali, but I think that's the extent of his connection to Ali. But now, I heard this guy threatened Diane Dimond. He threatened her life. Do you know that story?
You're kidding, man.
No,
I don't.
Yeah, this guy's was a thug, one of Jackson's thugs. That would go around and threaten people and intimidate people. And Feldman...
I can believe it.
Yeah. Well, look at the whole family, the whole Jackson family. My God, the stuff they're involved in. But because, Joe Jackson stole like $80,000 from a Korean church. They invested money with him, and he stole the money, and they got sued. But this Majestic character, what would his connection be to Corey Feldman that Feldman would dedicate an album to him?
I honestly, I can't.
Yeah.
I don't know, and but to be honest with you, it almost seems like Corey Feldman and Majestic almost have that sort of same relationship with the Jacksons, desperately trying to sort of be part of that group. I think Corey Feldman, he seems to just not want to give up the Michael Jackson thing.
Right.
Even that performance where it was just like, Michael Jackson, dressing like him and dancing like him. And they even said before the performance that he did, are you going to do some Michael Jackson moves for him? He goes, well, no. They're inspired moves. You got to remember, we were dancing together. We started dancing, roughly around the same time. And it's like, no, you idolize Michael Jackson and you're trying to somehow keep on that relationship. So it almost seems like they have the same sort of, bizarre hanging on type relationship.
Now, what do you make of that video? He did some kind of morning show, which wasn't a well-known morning show that I could tell, with pyrotechnics and dancing and the Corey's Angels. Do you think that was done to discredit him because it came out at the same exact time that this Radar Online story is hitting the press?
Either that, or maybe he's going to do an exclusive interview with the Today Show, exposing, who that name is. Maybe that could be part of it too. But I honestly think that, and Sharon Osbourne pointed this out, and on the talk, and she said that these people are incredibly vetted. That spot is a coveted spot. That you just don't put anyone on there to promote anything because it's such a well-watched program. To put Corey Feldman on with a bunch of scantily clad women wearing little halos for a song that is subpar at best and a performance that was again, I don't like criticizing people's art, but it was somewhat laughable. To put that on, and there had to have been rehearsals. They've had to have seen what this was. I mean, he had a video out which was very similar to what he was doing. There had to have been another motive, and he even said when he was on the talk that they were going to book him again.
Oh, really?
And I don't know what they're booking him for. I don't know if it's another performance or maybe he's going to be revealing something that we don't know. It's mind-blowing. When I saw it, I literally had to turn the other way. I was like, "Oh Lord, what are you doing?"
Yeah, and there's lighting, there's sound checks. Nothing happens by accident. The producers had to have witnessed this performance, so either it was put there to humiliate him, or you're right, like you said, there's some kind of a deal's been made. And it's just Corey is just so unself-aware, and which brings up another point too. This business with these Corey's Angels. Crap, where he lures these young girls to help them with their careers and their dreams and stuff like that. And he's preying on these kids, and they live with him in some way. What do you make of all that? And why would he be broadcasting that to the world that he's up to this stuff? It's so sleazy. What is going on with that?
Because I think that he really, and that we're talking about, he has no self-awareness. A lot of people who have these sort of narcissistic personalities, they don't. They want to be the constant center of attention. They want to be idolized. They want to be looked upon. They want to, and it's not enough. I don't think he's on stage on talk shows enough that fulfills that sort of, almost like inherent need.
Yeah.
He has to have these people literally living with him, sort of praising him, and sort of, being his, the sort of almost like Hugh Hefner type.
Right.
That's what I get out of it, and and it also goes down to abuse as well. It also goes down to this idea that I don't think he's really examined his own abuse. That it's all about control and power, and you can become. And I don't, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form Corey Feldman's a child abuser. What I'm saying, though, with these women, he's sort of replaying some of the loss of power and abuse that he's experienced. And he can call it whatever he wants to call it and make up contracts and say that he's doing this to help their careers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do it in other ways without having him live with you and sit there and call them Corey's Angels.
Now, have any of these girls, disgruntled, women come forward and said, "Hey, man, let me tell you what happened to me in there," or has any of that gone on, or anything?
The latest I heard, and I don't know if she was a Corey's Angel, but he was supposed to, on the Today Show, he was supposed to have a guitarist come play.
Okay.
And the guitarist that the last minute saw what was going on and literally backed out because she was so embarrassed of going on the show, and sort of told him that. And then, and from what was reported, Corey Feldman lashed out and said, "Well, don't have a plan to come to LA again. You'll never work here again," sort of thing. That is what I read recently. But I got to believe that eventually there's going to be women that are going to come forward and say, "Hey, look, they had him on Wife Swap.
Yeah,
they had him on That's Your Wife Swap, and he was doing the whole Corey's angel things, and the person he was swapping. It wasn't really a wife; it was one of his angels, one of his girlfriends. The person that came into Corey's home was like, "What the heck is going on there?" They were trying to. She was trying to convince the women there, "You got to get out of here. You're getting brainwashed here. You need to leave." And Corey, of course, defended the whole thing.
Yeah, he was on Surreal Life too and they filmed there for weeks. I think it's like 5-week shoot. And again, like all his weirdness, just right, and everyone else in the house just was fed up with him. It made no secret of it toward the end there. It's incredible, man. And he's got a website too for that Corey's Angels business, trying to lure these girls in there. It's
disturbing. I honestly think Corey Feldman is very, very opportunistic, and he understands that. Let's be honest. Again, he's not an A-list star. He's not a Marlon Brando. He just isn't. And in order for him to maintain the lifestyle that he has, what he has to do is continually try to keep his name front and center. And that's why I think you see a lot of these things, and you're going to see more of these things. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you know? You know anything about this guy, Lou Pearlman?
Lou Pearlman is a very interesting case because Nick Carter's mom alluded to the fact that she believed that Nick Pearlman was actually abusing her son at the time, and they never really definitively sort of answered that. But there was another band, if I'm correct, named LMFO, where somebody actually came out and said, "Oh yeah, Lou Pearlman, did this all the time."
Yeah.
That he would, if you're going to work for Lou Pearlman, you're going to have to be ready to do some things you're not going to want to do. And again, it's another case of somebody who understands that they have power, someone understands how the business works, and it doesn't surprise me that this is happening because it happens with women in Hollywood all the time. So you have, the casting couch just doesn't apply to women. It also applies to grown men, and it also applies to teenagers and children. So with Lou Pearlman, that was kind of touched upon. I know he just passed away, but I don't think it was ever really, really dug deep, if I'm correct.
Yeah, interesting too, because he got into this business of managing these boy bands because he was leasing private jets, and that's how he got into this world. And it seems like there's a lot of there's a thread that travels through all of this, through Trump and through Epstein and through all these different cases. Private jets. It always seems like the private pilots and private jets are flying these kids around from one adventure to another. Even the McMartin preschool case, these kids were talking about they were getting on private planes and private airports and stuff. And you hear about these stories about the North Las Vegas airport that a lot of people talk about. Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah. Look at the Franklin scandal.
Yeah.
Look at Lawrence King and how he was literally taking these young men up into Washington D.C. and taking them all over the country in these private private jets, and that's again in that great book of Nick Bryan where they actually have documentation of these young men on these planes, and a lot of it I think is transport, But a lot of it too is it's allure. You know, if you're going to, you know, try to sort of condition these men, what you have to do is you have to show the allure of it. Look, you're going to be on a private jet. Look, you're going to be staying in a beautiful suite. Look, you're going to be eating all this wonderful food. All these wonderful things can happen to you if you allow me to abuse you. Hence, Liberace.
Right.
And Mr., I guess I was wrong the last time, Thorson, Scott Thorson.
Yeah.
Hence what happened to him, how he lured him in. Same sort of thing.
And here we got Thorson right now sitting in prison up there in Reno. He got like, I think some insane time, like 15 years or something, for possession of a stolen wallet. You know. Now I know the guy had
stolen wallet, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, and you know he was living with Dennis Hoff. And Dennis Hoff, I was just down in Pahrump this weekend, down in Pahrump for the Green Party. I was running the Green Party table down there at the Harvest Festival, and Dennis Hoff had a booth down there too. So he was living with Dennis Hoff, who was the pimp from the Bunny Ranch, and Hoff got him a great deal, got him a great lawyer, got him a great deal. He was going to go to rehab, but Thorson skipped his appointment with the rehab and didn't turn himself in, and the judge wound up giving him like 15. It might be 30 years, but it's like 15. It's some insane time. You know, for even you know 3 strikes, you know, just with a stolen wallet. Well, you know, he was in bed with some guy and he took his wallet. Is what happened, you know. And then he tried to use the wallet to rent a motel room. It wasn't a big spending spree or something.
Well, what bothers me is what these judges, you know, when you look at, especially on a stolen wallet, you got to look at these people's history. You know, gee, I wonder why this guy became so screwed up. Well, let me think. He was, you know, taken in by Liberace at the age of 16 and essentially, you know, abused, molested, and thrown to the curb, you know, used and abused, and Liberace introduced him to cocaine.
Yeah. Yeah. Then he wound up. The guy was a government witness too. He wound up in at the Wonderland House, you know, the 400-floor murders, and then you know he testified for them. And then he's sitting in a motel room one day. They kick the door open. They shoot him 4 times. You know, so like the guy's, you know,
oh my Lord.
The guy said has no chance, and he winds up with Dennis Hoff. And Dennis Hoff's a nice guy, but you know, it's not the kind of conditions you want to be living under. Now, tell us about Bryan Singer. You think that's next in this?
It is the most misunderstood part of that whole documentary.
Okay,
Bryan Singer. Michael Egan, what he was saying was that DEN, which was Digital Entertainment Network, it was founded by a man by the name of Mark Collins Rector and his boyfriend, who he actually started dating when he was 16. He actually took the boyfriend from his parents' home. The parents gave him permission to it, by the way. And I think he was in his 30s, late 30s, was dating this 16-year-old. His name was Chad Shackley. And there was another gentleman that was invested in this, a young child actor by the name of Brock Pierce, who at the time was in his early 20s. So they start up this network, Digital Entertainment Network. They have this lavish home that was Suge Knight's old residence, like 12,000 square feet, pools, jacuzzis.
Wait a second, were they renting that house? Were they renting that house, or did they buy that house? You know,
I believe they bought it. I believe they own that house.
Because Suge Knight, was renting a home one time from the district attorney in Los Angeles County that was prosecuting him.
Well,
did you know that?
Well, I don't know if. Well, it was reported that it was Suge Knight's old residence. Now, I don't know if Suge Knight owned that home, and they bought it off of somebody else, but that's what they were saying.
Okay.
And what they did was they decided to say, well, you know what, we're going to, and again, it was a brilliant idea, it was just way too ahead of its time. We're going to stream our own content on the internet. The problem was there was dial-up at that point in the 90s, and you really couldn't stream content quick enough to actually watch it on your computer. So what happened was that Mark Collins Rector would produce various shows, but some of these shows, he would, obviously pick and choose these young teenage boys that he would want to star in them. and he would use them and sexually abuse them. And he would also throw these very lavish parties, and they were all male. There was no, there wasn't even a woman there to serve food. It was all men. And a lot of these men, you had some of the movers and shakers in Hollywood there, and part of them were there because he was trying to convince them to invest in Den, and then some part of them were there just because they wanted to go to these sort of illicit parties. And there were young, underage boys that were, in these parties that served these older men. And the rule was after dusk, it became dark. If you were around the pool, you could not wear a bathing suit. You had to walk around naked.
Right.
And so that's what he did. So what happened was with Bryan Singer is one of these days Bryan Singer was there, and there was a couple of other people. What Michael Egan says is that Mark Collins' director took Michael Egan and placed him on Bryan Singer's lap. And then Bryan Singer started to, masturbate him, and there was fellatio and all this other stuff. And then he claims that he literally took him out of the pool and anally raped him and all this. But what's misunderstood about that was that after this happened, and then Michael Egan leaves, and Michael Egan's mother contacted the police. They contacted the FBI. The police actually had them go in, and there's actually a video of this on the movie An Open Secret where he's documenting, the gun safe that he said he was locked in, child pornography and documenting other documents and all this other stuff. So he's documenting everything according to what the police want him to do, and then he's reporting it to the FBI, and then nothing happens. So then several years roughly around that time, when this whole thing was going down, Mark Collins' Rector was being arrested for trafficking a young child over lines from New Jersey. And he ended up getting convicted of that. And him, Chad Shackley, and Brock Pierce ended up fleeing the country. But so these allegations sort of sat. Then he went to a lawyer, and he did not mention Mark, Bryan Singer, Gary, Mr. Newman, Garth Ancier, and there was a guy named Goddard. He didn't mention him in the original complaint because the lawyer said, there's no way. You have to have really solid evidence before we can bring these guys up. So they got a judgment because Mark Collins' Rector had fled the country, and the judgment was $4.5 million, and he only ended up receiving like $25,000 from Brock Pierce. But he did actually file a lawsuit. So we go on, and they're getting ready to produce An Open Secret, and the people from Biz's parents know about Michael Egan. They know about his story, so they get him in contact with the producers of An Open Secret. He gets interviewed. Before the movie, like I said, can get released, he goes up with Jeff Furman. Jeff Furman puts him on national television in a big press conference. He accuses Bryan Singer right before the new X-Men movie comes out. He then, the next day, he comes out with his mother, and they're sobbing, and then later on they accuse other people. So everyone thinks, well, that's it, because they say, well, the case was withdrawn, and et cetera. That wasn't it. It was reported in New York Magazine what really happened. Michael Egan, while being represented by Jeff Furman, gets a call from Jeff Furman. And this is why they're doing the interview, they're doing this investigation on Michael Egan. And they say in the interview, he's in a panic, saying, Jeff Furman wants me to say these things, and he wants me to accept the settlement. He goes, he basically wants to have me sign away my right to speak. He wants me to kind of lie. He's making me say these things, and I don't know what to do. I don't want to be part of it. So the settlement was going to be $100,000. And Michael Egan refused that settlement. But here's where it gets, where this, and I've asked, I can't tell you how many people I've asked to find out what the story on this is. The other part of the story was that $100,000 settlement was part of a bigger settlement that there were 5 other accusers. Some of them were within the statute of limitations, and it was going to be for a reported $20 million settlement that Bryan Singer was going to pay out. And New York Magazine reported on this, and no one ever followed up. And I have tweeted Jeff Herman. I have tweeted Bryan Singer. I have done everything I can say. Can you just say yes or no? Did this happen? Was there a settlement? Yes or no? Neither of them will respond to it. So there has to be something going on there, because you would easily think that, no, it would never happened. I don't know what the New York Magazine was incorrect. No one's responding to this. And Bryan Singer was also accused of inappropriate behavior in a movie called Apt Pupil. And we all know what happened to Brad Renfro. Brad Renfro died at a very early age he was drug overdose. But what he was accused of was it was a shower scene, and there were, again, underage actors. They were supposed to wear flesh-bodied underwear when they were filming the scene. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the fight, he goes, no, you're going to have to take off that, and you guys are going to have to be fully nude. Well, some of the underage boys said, well, we can't do that. We're not of age. And they complained. And this made the news. And then it, again, disappeared. They said, oh, no, that never happened. But Pat Peterson, who was a former child actor, got involved in this. And he talked about how he was going after Bryan Singer and how basically everything was just hushed up. So, everyone wants to point the finger at Michael Egan, saying, well, look, he's now been arrested. There was fraud charges. He got arrested. It had nothing to do with this case, by the way, on other charges. And he's just nothing but an extortionist again. And but the reality is, if Bryan Singer did actually settle with 5 other accusers for $20 million, that's news. And people have a right to know that, and people have a right to know it did happen or didn't happen. And if it did happen, parents have a right to know. So when their children are on that set, they don't think that this last accusation was just, an extortion attempt. And
Bryan Singer, right now, is he free? Is any charges on Bryan Singer now?
No, there's no charges. It was none whatsoever. He, what was I going to say? He's been known in Hollywood of having a taste for these sort of young men. He's 49 or 48 right now, but having a taste for these young men. And as soon as this story broke, like I don't want to say 6 months, 8 months later, he said, "Oh, I'm having a baby, and I'm really bisexual, and I have a girlfriend now." And surprise, surprise, surprise. But no, there was never any charges against Bryan Singer. But he's now again directing. He's going to be directing the latest X-Men movie that came out. He's directing and whatnot. He's suffered nothing from this.
Now,
Michael Egan is the one that is.
How does Brad Renfro fit into this again?
Well, Brad Renfro, he was plucked out of obscurity. He was a child actor. He ended up becoming an addict, and he was part of this movie that Bryan Singer produced and directed. And it wouldn't surprise me. A lot of these, and even Matthew Valentinus brings this up when he was interviewed talking about An Open Secret. He says a lot of these drug overdoses you hear about, a lot of these, these former child actors acting out and stealing things. He goes, a lot of it can go back to what's really going on in Hollywood, that these children are just being passed around like a piece of meat. And the other thing that was mentioned in that Apt Pupil situation was the parents were saying that they had taken footage, because a lot of times when you film this stuff, you're going to have stuff it's going to end up on the cutting room floor.
Right.
But he was taking this footage and showing it to other, supposed pedophile friends, and they were watching it. That these young men that were all naked. And what a perfect, if you're going to be a child abuser, what a perfect scenario for you. You can film young boys naked and call it art, and then get away with it.
And Brad Renfro was discovered by Joel Schumacher.
Yes, another.
Was connected
again,
with
these names just all come up over and over again.
Because he directed The Lost Boys, right? With Corey Feldman and Corey Haim.
I believe so, yes. Joe Schumacher that's the other one they're thinking of might be the A-list person that might be named in the Corey Haim situation. But yes, Joe Schumacher is another name that keeps on popping up. Surprise, surprise, surprise.
Right.
And, but again, it's, as much as I'm not a big fan of Corey Feldman, his statements do ring true, that there is a group of individuals who have a lot of power, wealth, and money who are untouchable and who commit these crimes, and everything's under the radar and everything's sort of very, very planned and definitely organized.
Right, because this has been going on for a long time, because with the case with Roman Polanski, he's just drugging and raping this little 13-year-old kid. And that happened in Jack Nicholson's house, and they're all in cahoots. And then you got the Nicholson's buddies with Marlon Brando, Brando's kids are with Michael Jackson,
Well, let's take it even a step further.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Francis Ford Coppola.
Okay.
And there's a Francis Ford Coppola who we all know, and he's a beloved director. He basically discovered a man by the name of Victor Salva.
Okay.
Victor Salva, what happened was that he did a very short film, and Sony had like a contest for a short film, and you would win sort of an award and cash and whatnot. But anyways, Francis Ford Coppola saw this film and was so impressed that he decided to give Victor Salva its first shot, and that shot was a movie called Clown House. And the star of that sort of that award-winning movie that Victor Salva did, the first one, there was a child by the name of Nathan Forrest Winters. He decided to use him as the star in this new movie, Clown House. So this movie, again, had a very, very low budget. Part of this film was actually filmed at Francis Ford Coppola's home in Napa Valley. And before the film was sort of concluded, Nathan Forrest Winters had a breakdown and told his mother that Victor Salva was molesting him. And he wasn't just molesting him during the movie shoot. It started when he was 7 years old. What happened was that he became a family friend. They met him, I think he was working as a youth counselor or something. And they ended up befriending him. And Victor Salva was making these little homemade movies, and he would put Nathan in starring roles sort of thing. But he was molesting from the age of 7. So anyway, this gets out. The movie's not complete. Of course, Nathan Winters' mom says, "You're coming. We're taking you out of this film immediately." And they threaten to sue her. They make her bring her son back and say, "You need to finish this movie. You're under contract." Even though what happened was that he molested Nathan Forrest Winters on set, filmed it with the cameras he was using to film the film, and Nathan told his mom. They investigated. They found the film. They found child pornography. They found pictures of young boys in shower scenes and things, all this weird stuff. And they arrested them. And they forced the mother to bring the child back to finish the film. And Francis Ford Coppola is the one that was producing this film and partly bankrolling it. So the film comes out. It doesn't get canned. And in the film, the boys even filmed from behind. There's a nude scene of this child. Instead of taking that scene out, just saying, "Oh, this is beyond bad taste," They don't. They leave it in, and he can't even go to the premiere. They totally bar him from the premiere, and they try to get Victor Salva out from prison so he can attend the premiere, and it fails. So this happens. He gets 5 months or 6 months in prison. He gets out. And you would think Francis Ford Coppola would say, hey, I gave you my first chance. I trusted you. You took that trust and you ended up abusing one of the stars of this film. I never want to see you again. No. Victor Salva doesn't do that. What Victor Salva does is Victor Salva actually gives him, once he gets out of prison, $5,000 to live off of, and then talks about, he's actually interviewed about this, and I have a quote here I'm going to read that discusses what he said when questioned about Victor Salva and helping him get a movie. He writes, only in retrospect did things really add up. You have to remember, while this was wrong, a total tragedy, the difference in age was very small. Okay, Victor Salva was 29, and the child was 12 during the filming of that movie. And then he talks about giving Victor Salva a second chance, and he says, someone had launched a campaign against Victor saying, how dare you, how can you give this guy a movie to make? So I helped Victor get the job. My attitude is that he has talent, and that talent in itself is good, and we don't have to embrace the person who has this talent to believe in their art. So he's essentially saying that his art's so good that the fact that he molested the child on set, and the fact that it was a movie that I was producing doesn't mean anything. So Victor Salva then goes, and guess what happens? He produces a movie called Powder, and directs a movie called Powder. And that movie, the studio that produced, put that movie out was Disney. The Disney-affiliated companies that put out Powder. And they have a convicted pedophile directing that movie. And when it came out, Nathan Forrest Winters and his friends were picketing the movie, but the movie still did very, very well. And then Francis Ford Coppola takes it a step further and allows him he produces a movie called Jeepers Creepers, the first one, the second one, and now there's a third one coming out that he's helping produce. So a convicted pedophile, he allows and promotes to go back in a position of authority where the first time he was in a position of authority, he totally abused. He's now saying, well, there you go, here's another outlet for you. And that's Francis Ford Coppola.
I didn't know Coppola was involved. I remember the story about Powder, but I had no idea that Coppola was involved with this character, Salva.
And he made excuses for him. And he instead of saying, if I was in that position, if I was Francis Ford Coppola and that had happened, my first concern would be, I'm not going to help Victor Salva. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure Nathan Winters is taken care of, and that his life is okay. And if I have to help him get jobs, if I have to, teach him the art of movie making, I'm going to do that, because what a horrible thing to happen to that young man on set on a movie that I was part of.
Yeah, with my cameras, Yeah, I used my cameras, In his home.
In his home.
Incredible, man. What are you saying? This happened in Coppola's home?
Yes, in his Napa Valley home. It was probably filmed in his Napa Valley home, and it was reported that some of the abuse was filmed. What happened was that after they would shoot, they would have rehearsals.
Right.
And then it was during those rehearsals where Victor Salva took the camera and filmed him basically sexually assaulting this child. And then when, this comes out, again, instead of canning the movie was a low budget, it was a low budget horror film. Just can the project. So, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry, but we're not going to allow this poor young man to have to see this film shown and then have it shown on video. And he's naked in the film. Victor Salva shows his backside in the film. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to somebody.
I think Coppola too had the death of one of his sons in a boating accident. I think one of Ryan O'Neal's kids was involved in that. You familiar with that whole story?
I don't know that story. I didn't follow. Once I read this, whatever I thought of Francis Ford Coppola was out the window. I'm sorry.
No, I hear you. Yeah, because it's always interesting too that there's a lot of these bizarre deaths, boating accidents. These weird deaths could be to cover up, previous abuses and stuff. That they want to silence it.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah. So now you have another story, but again, Robert Hughes. Did you tell that story, Robert Hughes?
Robert Hughes. Now this is an interesting story because we're going away from Hollywood.
Okay.
We're going into Australia. Okay. Now I don't know if you got the picture, but I sent you a picture.
Yes.
And that picture shows a young Sarah Monahan. Okay. Robert Hughes was he was in a sitcom, and a very popular sitcom in the late 80s, 90s. He was as popular as Bill Cosby was back in the day, we'll put it that way. Robert Hughes literally was abusing this girl literally on set, and he would abusing her on set and at his residence. Okay? She tells people about this, what's going on, and the show was called Hey Dad. And she tells an older cast member, she was probably 18, 19 at the time, what's going on. And she doesn't know what to do. But other people that were cast members had inclinations that Robert Hughes was abusing this young girl, if not other young girls. They go up to the producers and tell them what's happened, and they're basically told to keep quiet, to say nothing. So, now, I want to say 12 years later, maybe 11 years later, she goes on a show, and she's talking about Robert Hughes and talking about the show. And I tell people this is an important video because it shows how people will not admit and sort of bury these things. She never brings it up. So 20 years later, she brings it up, and it gets reported on. And Robert Hughes gets investigated. And Robert Hughes, I think's own niece accuses him of child molestation. And he ends up getting arrested. But what's funny is, in that picture I sent you, you can see this young girl sitting on his lap, and she even talks about this picture in an interview, and his hand is right between her legs. It's literally right between her legs. There's like a cloth or something covering his hand, but it's right between his fingers. And someone asked her about that, and she goes, "Is he doing what I think?" He goes, "Yes, he's doing exactly what you think he's doing." And he was so bold that he didn't even care if people were taking pictures of him. That's how blatant and prevalent this stuff can be, and how it's more important to keep a highly rated sitcom on than to expose this for what it is. And this is where, again, when we talk about why this is not coming out, why did an open secret not, get shown? Well, a big part of it is because famous child actors did not get behind this. I mean, where was Jodie Foster? Where was Leonardo DiCaprio? Where was Tobey Maguire? Where were these guys not saying, if this is not going to, because they had a problem with distribution. If this is not going to get distribution, we are going to form our own distribution company and put this damn thing out, because we want to make sure that children who come after us are not getting abused. We want to make sure the next generation it's not going to happen to them. And you know why they didn't do anything? Because they knew if they said a word, they would probably not have a career. And that's what actually happened to Elijah Wood when he recently came out, talked about this, did an interview, and said that, there's something going on in the underbelly of Hollywood that's very seedy. He made that quote, and a day to 2 days later, he almost had to retract it and backtrack, because he knew that he probably would not get work in Hollywood for making that statement. And that's what people have to understand, that it's, I'm hoping that this Corey Haim thing comes to fruition, because if it's a big enough name, maybe it will get big enough attention that this might finally get stopped, or at least curbed.
Well, you'd think, if Charlie Sheen's name comes out in this, there's so much stuff around this. This guy's, there's deaths around this guy that have gone silenced. So he has some kind of big power. way beyond just power of a mogul. It blackmail dirt he has. Plus, he has his own thugs and goons and stuff. His own little hit squad. So.
Well, in an open secret, there was another gentleman mentioned. His name is Brian Peck.
Okay.
And Brian Peck's still working in Hollywood. He was arrested for assaulting, and the person never came up. But a very, very famous Nickelodeon star that came out of Nickelodeon became a very famous actor, even to this day. He's not named. And guess who he's good friends with? Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, I believe
good friends with Charlie Sheen. So, again, these names just keep on getting linked one to another, to another, to another, to another. All these same names keep on popping up, and...
You talk about this picture you sent me here and you can see the girl's face too. She's, obviously being in distress here. I don't know if you heard the interview I did with Jimmy Savile's great niece, where she describes, when you heard that, okay, when she was like 12 years old.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, right. When she was 12 years old, they dressed her all up. Oh, Jimmy Savile's coming to the house to visit, and they sat her on his lap, and he molested her right there in front of everybody. And then he came back again. He didn't see her another 10 years. And on the day of her engagement party, he showed up at the engagement party, pulled her into a corner, and molested her there again. And again, I guess people were watching. People knew about it, then left. Just did whatever he wanted, this guy. Just incredible. Now, there's supposed to be pictures, too, of Feldman as a kid with parties. And he's saying that his molesters would show up to his childhood parties, and there's pictures of it. And do you know what I'm talking about with that?
I haven't seen any of those online, but yeah, I can believe it. I can. He said that what happened was that a lot of these parties were being thrown, and what they would do is there would be alcohol, drug-induced type parties, and essentially what happened was that these these young actors would come in and just get passed around, and that's what it was claimed of Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, that literally that they were passed around like pieces of meat. And I have to maybe do a little digging in there and see if I can find these pictures, but it doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't. First of all, why Hollywood's the only place I can think of where children get to socialize with adults in adult situations. That's one of the few places I can think about where there's alcohol and drugs and they're encouraged to participate in these sort of behaviors. Even Drew Barrymore talked about this.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up.
Parties.
Yeah, she would go to Studio 54 when she was like 12 years old and stuff like that. There is an underbelly and that's there, and I believe there are a lot of very good people and a lot of good people who work in Hollywood and have all the best intentions. But the problem is that these people don't have the strength enough to say enough's enough, we're outing you. Now, I mentioned there's an organization called Biz Parents. Biz Parents has been around for a little over 10 years now. And what they do is they try to educate parents on how to maneuver in the industry and, how to keep your children safe. But they also have taken reports and sort of keep their eye out for some of these men that are doing these things. And even they say that it is so much more prevalent than anyone can even imagine. And, it has to... I'm so sad that An Open Secret did not get the distribution it deserved, because it would have been a really very strong beginning. Corey Feldman, I think, started it. Unfortunately, I think Corey Feldman's not the right person in that role. I just don't think he is. I don't think some of his antics and what he does, and the fact of his sort of strong defense of Michael Jackson, I think puts him in a position where he isn't really the right figurehead for this. Elijah Wood have been a whole lot of a better one, to be honest. But unfortunately, we've got to take what we can take. And
I don't know. There has to be some big star that can get behind this, and like a Jodie Foster, and say, okay, this is going on. We're going to start some sort of coalition so we make sure that these men are totally nowhere near children. Because Brian Peck's still working with children. It's rumored that Martin Weiss is still working with children. It's rumored that even Bob Villard still has, his hands in Hollywood. So,
how does Jodie Foster fit into all this, though?
Well, Jodie Foster was a child actress,
right.
and she was in a film we all know, Taxi.
Right.
Okay, where it was a very, even back then, controversial movie for a child to be put in that sort of type of environment. And what was happening was people, and there's a video online showing her, people were collecting her pictures from Taxi, that movie, Taxi Driver,
yeah,
and trying to have her autograph these pictures because they were so in love with the child actress, not the adult actress, but the child. And you could see her, the pictures getting handed to her, and she would take the picture and hand it off to somebody else to throw out.
Oh, really?
She wouldn't sign it. So obviously she knows that there's stuff going on, and she's been around the business enough to know that there's stuff going on, there's been stuff going around and stuff going on. And I think she's a strong enough actress and a respected enough actress to get some noise created. And I think she would be a perfect advocate for, for spearheading this movement. Because, I commend Corey Feldman for doing what he can, but I don't think he's not a strong enough person to really do much with this. There's too much surrounding him. There's too much
magnificent, majestic, magnificent. Like the kind of character he's in. Would forget it. Yeah, you're right. Now, because we're down to like the last 20 minutes. Now, what do you got new on Michael Jackson? You have some new information you came up with?
There is, and the news is that, and I'm glad they have the law firm of Finaldi and Company. There's a guy named Vincent Finaldi who his law firm has taken over this case.
Okay.
And they have gotten many settlements and judgments for victims of abuse from the Catholic Church, and they have clout. And they have a special division just dedicated to child sexual abuse victims. What they are saying is that after looking at Neverland Ranch, and after looking at Michael Jackson's corporations, that they're finding that Neverland Ranch and and MJJ Ventures and all that wasn't just a company, but it was had a thinly veiled second purpose, and that was for procuring children that Michael Jackson had an interest in. And this really brings this wide open, because now they're forgetting about the estate. They're kind of saying, okay, well, the probate case is over. We're not focusing on that anymore. We're focusing on the people that were there, that did nothing, that saw things and looked the other way, and that helped to get these children from all over the world into Michael Jackson's hands. There's going to be a name that you're going to hear over and over and over again. Her name is Norma Stakos. And Norma was basically the manager for Neverland Ranch for a good many years. And when the 93 case came up, Norma Stakos suddenly ran over to Greece when the 93 case came up and the allegations came up, because they didn't want her to be called as a witness and sort of be called in front of a possible criminal trial. As soon as the case was settled, Norma Stakos came back to Neverland Ranch, and she was actually deposed by a grand jury. But the reality is that she was what they're saying is she was very instrumental of getting these children to Michael Jackson, and that she even warned other staff members not to let them leave their male children alone with Michael Jackson. And she's even, one of the former employees that worked at the Neverland Ranch has even said that she used to call these young little boys that were around Michael Jackson his little boyfriends. So what they're saying is that she was in a head position at the Neverland Ranch, and that she orchestrated a lot of this sort of abuse to occur. And she would, make sure that these children and their families had plane tickets, accommodations. They were given gifts, and she was instructed if any number one of these boys called, that one of his special friends called, that give them what they want, no questions asked. That she was to take care of it. And the other part of it is that there were other people who were part of this organization, Michael Jackson Incorporated, that knew, and whether it was security guards, whether it was people that worked there, whether it was people that helped promote his tours, whether even Bob Jones alluded to this, who's now he's now unfortunately dead. He alluded to this in an interview that people knew things and said nothing. And that's, I think, a smart move on their part, because what they're trying to do now is to say, hey, look, this was an orchestrated, organized, and they're saying it was one of the most sophisticated operations of procuring children that they've ever seen. That this went on for years, and that nobody really did anything that was in a position of power to do something, did anything. They just, as they put it, walked these children right into the bedroom. And that's part of the latest of what's going on. And the other part is that they are going to other countries and looking for other people that were silenced by these gag orders and agreements, and trying to get them to come forward and testify. And I think they might get their wish. I think they might actually find other young men that were abused. I mean, there's a case there's a young man that said nothing happened, but an interesting story is a young man by the name of Omar Badi. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I think it's Omar Badi. He was dancing in front of a Michael Jackson concert, and Michael Jackson happened to see him and invited him up. Okay, and they ended up, inviting him in to see the concert and all that. He ended up becoming friends with the family. He moved the whole family over from Norway to Michael Jackson's home, and employed both the mother and the father of in employment for MJ Incorporated. And he basically took this boy on, and this boy got so obsessed with Michael Jackson that he ended up sort of temporarily changing his name to Michael Winters. And they used to call him Little Michael, and it was basically a known fact of the people that worked there that he would spend night after night after night in Michael Jackson's bed in his room. And there's pictures of him with Michael Jackson's children, and at one point during Michael Jackson's funeral, he's front and center. Joe Jackson tried to push this off, that Omar Badi was actually Michael Jackson's son, and then Omar Badi finally came around and said, no, I'm not Michael Jackson's son. Michael Jackson made him, and this goes back to the Liberace thing, by the way. Michael Jackson would dress him up in the same clothing. They had the same eyeliner on. He would grow his hair out. They would wear the same sort of Michael Jackson garb. He tried to get Omar Badi to look like him and be like him. But to move a whole family over, and this boy spent years with him. This was after the 93 allegations. Off and on, he would spend years with Michael Jackson. And when interviewed, there was an interview he did, and they asked him about Michael Jackson and sexual abuse. And essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but essentially he said Michael Jackson was very innocent when it came to sex. And a lot of people and he didn't have a whole lot of knowledge, or he was very immature when it came to sex. And a lot of the things that he did, people might look down upon. Okay, that's sort of what he said in that interview, because he was asked about sexual molestation. Never said, nope, he never molested, it never happened. He sort of phrased it that, Michael Jackson was kind of like a child, and, he didn't really understand, and which that narrative said over and over again. But, another example, and that could be, I don't know if my body will be coming forward. I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. But that's the type of children that Michael Jackson had relationships with all the time.
What do you know about, there was a family in New Jersey, a very similar story. There was a family in Jersey, I think it was either one boy or two boys. He had a relationship
there
with...
There was a set of brothers and even a younger brother,
right.
and that was the Casio family.
Right.
And one of his main sort of confidants, his name is Frank Tyson now, Frank Tyson Casio. He, during the 93 allegations, when this was all going on, Michael Jackson took these young New Jersey boys, and then they met Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson befriended the father, and these boys were babies. And Michael Jackson ended up basically becoming like an extended member of the family. And these sort of young men, these boys, and they have a sister too, grew up with them. But during the 93, the whole thing that was happening in 93, Michael Jackson took these young boys, and he was shown in a hotel room waving a magazine called Child out the window, and Frank Casio and his brother are there with him. And what happened was that the lead investigator of the case, Bill Dworden, called to alert the family and say, we need to know that we're investigating Michael Jackson on child molestation charges. And the family said, nope, we perfectly trust him. He would never harm our children. And that's that. And Frank Tyson admits to sleeping in Michael Jackson's bed, admits it to the fact that he was even in his late teens and he was still sleeping in Michael Jackson's bed. And Frank Tyson was also accused of showing Gavin Arvizo pornography during that whole case. And, he was, because of the case, obviously what happened with the case, he was sort of cleared. But that was one of the accusations, that Frank Tyson was, showing Gavin Arvizo again to sort of bring down his guard to make it more easy for Michael Jackson probably to molest him.
Right, and these two kids, they went to work for Jackson as adults later on, right?
Yes, he did. He went to work for Michael Jackson, and he wrote a book about Michael Jackson. Some of the book is not the most flattering. Talks about Michael Jackson being drunk and how they had to take him out of the jacuzzi and all these things. And but he still says that Michael Jackson was good as gold and would never harm anybody. But again, I look at these young men and I understand the fact that it's so difficult when if you are a compliant victim, and you're dealing with what we call a compliant victimization, where you as a victim believe that somehow you were sort of to blame for your own abuse. You somehow played a part in that.
Right.
It's so difficult for these men to come forward because they feel somehow there's the blame, and also they feel that they're betraying somebody that may have been, again, in all other reasons, very good to them. So, that whole story is very strange because it's not just Frank Tyson, it's his other brother and another brother. And if I'm correct, there was a letter that Frank Tyson's sister wrote, and it was about the Applehead Club. Right. And she writes, and this is when Frank was in his teens or hanging around with Michael Jackson, and she writes that you guys must hate me because I'm not a boy. I'm not allowed in the club, and I can't share Michael's bed. Only you can share Michael's bed. And she writes this long, and again, it's her letter when she's a child. But boy, does that say a lot. Yeah. That she wasn't invited into his bed, but yet the brothers were.
Oh, brother. All right, man. We got only a couple of minutes left. We got about 5 minutes left. You have some advice to organizations that parents can go to help them navigate the Hollywood system?
Yeah, one of them is definitely BizParents, and I spoke about it. It's bizparents.org. The woman that founded the organization, she had children in the industry, and she has been doing this for years. It's a nonprofit, and she actually helped to get a law sort of passed that's now requiring fingerprinting for anyone that works with children in the industry. So she spearheaded that law, and she got it passed right before the movie An Open Secret came out. It's something that parents can utilize. The other one is something that Paul Peterson, it's called the minor consideration. He established that, and his main, when he established it, it was about children being overworked and being, not educated properly, and how back when in his day that children were really just sort of used and abused in a sense of just, workhorses. That's why he established that foundation. But he also now is talking about the other end of it, which is child exploitation. And he's been doing that for years. So, and then obviously there are definitely groups that you can go to that, victim survivor groups. And I encourage parents are going to put their children in this business to find a way to see that movie An Open Secret, and talk to people who were victimized as children who were in the industry. I'm sure they're more than willing to help share their stories. Talk to them and get their lowdown on how it happened, how they were sort of persuaded and groomed. Because a lot of these, when we think about men abusing children in Hollywood, we think of always the A-list celebrities or the big producers or directors, but a lot of times it's the low-level people as well, the acting coaches, the dialogue coaches, the people that are helping them get gigs, those sort of people that are abusing children, and they need to realize that, and if your child is in this industry and they're in Hollywood, you need to be around them 24/7, and you don't take no for an answer. You don't take no. And if someone wants to take your child off to do coaching, you go with them. If someone wants to take your child off because they want to do some sort of retreat, or somehow they want to do something that where you're not invited, you say no. You do whatever you have to do to make sure that your child is monitored and watched 24/7, and you make it clear to the people that are that have hired your child and that are allowing your child to participate in whatever production it is, that you are a vigilant parent, and you are not going to be kept quiet. That you're not going to be one of what we call the stage parents, but you're going to make sure your child is safe. Who cares how many scenes your child gets? Who cares what dialogue? Who cares? What you need to care about is making sure that your child is not put in a position where they can be victimized. And that's a big, big part of it.
People need to be aware, too, with these production companies, they hire these little casting agents and these little casting companies that come and go. They change names for almost every project. They have a different corporate name because they stiff people on the money. And they hire subcontractors to go out and do casting and to locate actors and actresses and casting, people for parts. And it's a really sleazy, it's fly-by-night. It's a lot of guys doing freelance, and even though they have a company name, they got a card. In a month, as soon as this job is done, they get a different company name and a different card, and they're running around. It seems to be rife for abuse to these casting agents,
It all comes down to, again, not being scared to speak up,
right.
Not being scared to be vigilant. And I'm sure Elijah Wood talked about, when he talked about how he knew that there were things going on in Hollywood. He said, my mother would not allow me to any of these parties. My mother would not allow me anywhere near this. So there are parents that are vigilant, that know how to maneuver the system, but they can't be blinded by the carrot being held in front of them. They can't be bullied into saying, well, if you don't let me film your child, naked, in a shower scene, then he's going to be kicked off the production.
Right.
Or if you don't let me take your child on this retreat and this acting coaching retreat, that you can't be bullied. You have to report it, and you have to be strong and vigilant, and you have to say no. You're not going to do that, and if you do that, I'm going to make sure I make as much noise as I possibly can to make sure everyone knows what you're doing.
Okay, Mike Parziali, we're out of time. Your website is mjvictims.com. Thank you again for another great show, another great informative show. We'll have you back soon. As soon as you have something new come up, just give me a call right away, okay?
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome.
Okay, they had Mike Parziali, mjvictims.com. You can find his website there. And I think that was a real, we were only supposed to do 1 hour, and I had a ton of information come out there. This is probably going to play on a Friday night, so you're going to have to reboot or refresh your Spreaker. All the other stations are fine, do whatever you want. But for Spreaker, to refresh in order to hear the after show.